This video will question the opinion of Vatican Catholic about Saint Thomas and the Immaculate Conception. I recommend you to watch this video about this topic first. Vatican Catholic did a lot of good stuff, but in this topic I cannot agree with him. He cites Pius IX, who says that by a singular grace and privilege, in the merits of Jesus Christ, Mary was preserved from the stain of all original sin from the first instant of her conception. And then he shows a passage which is assumed to be written by St. Aquinas by some, where the soul of the Blessed Virgin was incurred with the stain of original sin. Some scholastics make the distinction between de jure and de facto. De jure, she should be under original sin, but de facto she was preserved from it. That would be a distinction which some theologians do apply. They compare it also to a rule which a king has given, that all people has to be subject to it, but the king can free his son from this law. This is an analogy for Christ, who frees Mary from this law. But to go in the Latin text, there is written anima, for soul. The only problem is that in another passage of the Summa, Aquinas writes that there are three souls. He also uses the Latin terms nutritiva, sensitiva, intellectiva. You could translate this with vegetative, sensitive, and intellectual soul. Aquinas writes a lot about this topic and also debunks some opinions about this. We will go in detail on this topic, but it's just important to mention that if Aquinas is talking about the soul, it's not clear if he talks about the intellectual soul, the vegetative soul, the sensitive soul in the context of Mary. Also, someone could say that he denied the active Immaculate Conception, but did not deny the passive Immaculate Conception, or that he denied it at some part of his life, but accepted it at another part of his life. But if my answers are not sufficient, I will now go to Cardinal Sfondrati, who wrote a large work on St. Aquinas and the Immaculate Conception. He writes that a lot of statements of St. Aquinas on this topic are corrupted. He is also quoting various passages where St. Aquinas teaches the Immaculate Conception. He is one of them. He also answers the passage from the Summa which Vatican Catholic is quoting. And Cardinal Sfondrati seems to conclude that the passage is corrupted. Now I will give some pictures. It would be too long to read this, and also is English not my mother tongue, so my reading would be horrible. But also Cardinal Sfondrati says that St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bernard, and other theologians did not deny the passive Immaculate Conception, but only the active conception. And Vatican Catholic seemed to say that Benedict XIV was exaggerating when he said that St. Aquinas was without error, without flaw, but Pope Benedict XIV explicitly says that St. Aquinas was defended by Cardinal Sfondrati, and he affirms the answer of Cardinal Sfondrati in a lot of points. And Pope Benedict XIV also says that the feast of the Immaculate Conception is not about the active conception, but about the passive conception. And that's interesting, because later in the bull which speaks ex cathedra about the Immaculate Conception, there is referred to the feast of the Immaculate Conception. It's very important to look also on the Latin text of Pope Benedict XIV, that you can see I did not imagine this from my head. This is his distinction, which a lot of theologians did before and after him apply. Also, Bryant is teaching it. Active conception is that by which the body, with all its members, is constituted. Passive conception is that in which the rational soul unites with or is infused into the physical organization. It is the latter, the passive conception, which is understood when we speak of the Immaculate Conception of the Most Blessed Virgin. Also, Pope Alexander VII is talking about the infusion, and he is referring to other popes in the Council of Trent. And a theologian prior to Vatican II writes that the term conception does not mean the active or generative conception by the parents. It does not concern the immaculateness of the generative activity of the parents, neither does it concern the passive conception absolutely and simply, but it means the person is truly conceived when the soul is created and infused into the body. For example, also the scholastic Petrus Aureoli was teaching this distinction. Also the Thomist, Lagrange, and a lot of other theologians. It's important to make this distinction because otherwise St. Bonaventure, St. Albert the Great, Alexander of Hales, St. Aquinas, St. Bernard, and even some church fathers would deny the Immaculate Conception. Of course, this would not debunk Catholicism, but it would create a lot of problems. So it is easier and more prudent to hold to the opinion of Pope Benedict XIV, Cardinal Sfondrati, and the other theologians. We could cite a lot of them. I was only citing a few of them because of time. So passages from St. Aquinas, which go against the Immaculate Conception and which you cannot defend, we should say that they are corrupted, or we should say that St. Aquinas changed his mind about this topic. I did now not answer all the points of Vatican Catholic of his video about the Immaculate Conception, but I think in general that this answer or questioning of Vatican Catholic is in some way important, although I appreciate a lot of his videos and works, for example about the papacy, the filioque against Protestants, etc.